on and demos screen key. Okay, there we go. These need. Okay, so all of my videos start with okay, so I do try not to. I know that's as well. But what I'm going to do is we're going to go through an example of. We'll start with an enumeration, and we'll think about the priv-esc a little bit later. But we're going to go through an example of how we might come up with a reasonable idea for a local enumeration, and how we might implement that and put it into the provided framework. Okay, so in this, I'm going to assume that you're going to make use of the sort of the starting point that I gave you. That's not a requirement. You can extend it, change it, do whatever you like with it. In fact, I would recommend that you do it a lot nicer. You know, use the menu system that you saw, you know, with the console menu plugin or something, library or something like that. You know, so you don't have to use it, but I'm going to use it here because it's one of the ways that I think it's useful for you to work together is to have a common central point. Okay, so something you can work on at least to start with, and then later each of you can add to or change or modify your version and still use that common interface to those plugins. So first of all, what do I mean by common interface? Let's have a look at that. Leap. We're already in starting point, so that's good. Right, so what I've done is I created a class, actually a few classes that represent the abstract version of these things, right? So remember we had a couple of sessions on classes and objects, and we've looked at them, you know, a few times now. We've made things with them. Here, I've used that idea to say each of these two things that we refer to, whether it's an enumeration or it's privilege escalation, they're both items that have similarities, right? So I've made something called item. I couldn't think of a better name. There probably is a better name for it because item's a bit too generic, but they are a launchable, executable sort of series of things. And in those, each of them is going to have a, some sort of initializer, and ideally you would have some basic data about them. Now what I've done is I've included in the initialization, if you don't overload it, it will say that it's not for actual use, it's by me, and someone needs to write this bit. Okay, so that encourages you to, if you see this data coming out in your plugin, you know you need to override these things. So we'll see an example of that in a bit. We have an execute function. So the execute function is what we use to launch it. Now, in the general case, for privilege escalation, for enumeration, that might be enough. You just say go and run. But in other times, you might need some actual data, right? So you might have variants on this that require some data to be given to them before they run. You can decide whether you ask for that from the user, whether you want to build it into the menu system somehow or whatever. But each particular case will have its own requirements. So think about it. You can always talk to the staff as well. So talk to Adam, talk to me, talk to Dan. Well, talk to any of the staff if you want to, but we're the ones that are going to know it best. And just think about how best to do those things. So again, at the moment, if you run this, all it says is this should be overridden in your plugin. Info will return useful information. And so this is the kind of stuff that you might put on if you wanted to provide in the menu some information to the user. In the starting point bit, what I've done is I've given you a menu that when you select one of these, the first thing it does is it gives you all the information and then makes you type yes in capital letters before it executes. So it means that you don't accidentally run the wrong one. You'll see all this information and it comes out. And all this is doing at the moment is putting the name, who it's by, and description of it. Okay, so we can actually test individual things out really simply. Okay, so we're going to do that now. cd checkout loop source. So I'm going to run Python, and I'm going to import plugins. Okay, so we can actually just load up this file. It's called plugins, and then I'm going to say enumeration is equal to plugins dot enumeration, and if you look, enumeration is just an empty class that extends, as in it inherits from item. So we will have all of these things by default. So we can look at that enumeration like this, and then we can say enum.info to see what the information is, and you can see it takes all that stuff. We can do enum.execute to run it. Well, it doesn't actually do anything, it just prints out some text, and that's it. That's all it does. Okay, why would we bother writing that? Well, the reason is, beyond this, we can now start doing things like, and I'm going to split my screen. We can now do things like this. So here, I've got what I've called dumb pseudo escalation. Okay, so dumb pseudo escalation, it's mostly documentation. If you look at it, it explains what's going on. And here, it's in the initializer. The first thing it does is it calls the initializer for its parent. Okay, so it just says, right, well, do whatever the privilege escalation generic object is, because here you can see it extends that, and pass me in. This doesn't actually have one, but it inherits from item. So really, all this is going to do is going to set up this code. Okay, and it does whatever's in there. I've then also passed over a bunch of other stuff. In fact, we don't even need password. It was just sort of example of adding something extra. But now I've done the basic initialization, and even though I'm overriding these, it's useful to do it because later on you might add some other stuff in here, like version numbers or how many times things have been run, or logs, empty log parts, or whatever you want to do that you still want to go over here. So just because at the moment these three things are being reset doesn't mean it needs to be taken out. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So later, if I change this, I still inherit that functionality, whereas at the moment I could take this line out and it would behave exactly the same, but then anything that changes in here now wouldn't be reflected in my new class dumb pseudo escalation. So what does it actually do? It sets some data and it changes the names of things. So it becomes dumb pseudo escalation, not that useful. The author actually is the same. The description explains what it is. And the execute has been overridden as well. So now over here, it just got execute, says this should be overridden. Well, this is how you do that. You just create your own execute. So this is an example of how you put things together. So this is what you're given. And we can test that out as well. So we can import, I forgot to call it JS_plugins. Sorry, just 1 second. So import JS plugins, and now we can make an instance of that dumb pseudo progress. We'll call it. So equals JS plugins dot dumb pseudo escalation, and it requires a piece of data. If you look in the initializer here, it says it wants a password. It doesn't actually use it. I just put it in there just to demonstrate something. So we'll say swordfish anyway. And now DSE is an object of dumb pseudo escalation type, but I can do DSE.info, and look, I get that information. I didn't write it, but it's inherited from here. Why did I do it so that I have this one and this one when they're actually identical? Again, at the moment, I don't need them to be different, but later I might have differences with how a privesc works and how an enumeration works. Different ways to do things. Like, for example, actually, do you know what I probably want to do is I want to have something that changes the information that you get. So let's do that just as a demonstration of the kinds of things that you might do in your classes. So def info in a privesc is going to return whatever the item version of this would return appended to this text, privesc. And if I take the same idea into here, okay, and I'm just going to quick unload this up again, import JS plugins, create one of them, then ask for the info. Now they all start with privesc. So when you're asking for information, it's not easy to get confused about which one it is. Okay, so if this is information that's meant to be presented to a user, that's kind of a handy thing to do. Okay, so that explains to you why those classes are created and the kinds of things you might want to do. You can actually make them work differently depending on what they are. Okay, the other good thing about the framework that's given, and again, you don't have to use it, but it's there in case you want it, is I've put in a little bit of a menu. Okay, so it's not the greatest menu in the world, but one of the things it does do is it gives you a way to have a list of privilege escalations and a list of enumerations, and it will display all of that information to the user. So back out here, if I run Leap, then you can see it gives you a menu and it says, right, P0, that's privesc 0, is dumb SU de-escalation. So I'm going to run that one, and there you can see my change has propagated through. So it actually says privesc dumb escalation, not that useful. Enter yes in capitals to execute, yes, and then it tells me what to do about it. I can quit, and I can quit. Okay, right. So that's the framework again. Just a little bit of a recap. But what we're going to do now is we're going to write something to add to this, so that it will have an enumeration as well as the privesc. Okay. So how do we go about this? Well, the first thing is you might just think about what you know. All right. So you've been looking at cybersecurity. You've been in this kind of area. Hopefully you've had a go at some hack the box things, or try hack me, or over the wire, or all this kind of stuff that you can play with. There's plenty of stuff out there. I know many of you do, or you've seen it in some of the classes. If you've been in Chang's module and you've looked at how things work, you've heard about the concepts and the stages of pen tests and things like that. You might already have some ideas. If not, what I suggest you do is you look for really simple things like basic Linux enumeration for pen testers. Right? Let's Google for something. Pen testing cheat sheet. That sounds fantastic. Let's have a look at that. There is also the High on Coffee cheat sheet, which I think I've shown you before. But enumeration, a bunch of things that you can do, right? So general enumeration, FTP. So things like FTP, SSH, these are not local. These are remote things. So let's have a look. Mounting file share. So knowing what's in there, that's quite good. Let's see what it says about this. Okay. Show mounts on a remote system. Okay, not that useful. I don't like this list. It's not got enough in it. I want more options.
This is an absolute Linux Smart Enumeration is a brilliant script. I really like just while you're showing it. So I really like this one. LinPs is nice, but I prefer this. And it gives you, if you scroll that down, up, right, if you have a look at the things it's looking for here, this is a nice list of things you might want to check, right?
Yeah, this is ideal actually. So let's have a better look at these things. So do you know what? Should we just install it quickly? It's probably not going to be that
While you're installing it, I'll tell you my sneaky enumeration. So for those of you who do things like hack the box, right, this is one that you don't see in the cheat sheets because it's not really real world. But if you think about how people create their CTFs, they'll get a base system and then they'll install the exploits on top of it. And because it's not a real world system with a lot of use, there tends to be only a few files. So have a look at the date and time flags for find, because you can narrow it down to only the files that they've modified, if you're lucky. Just as a side note.
There you go. So I'm running this now, and you can see it's done things like even this is useful, right? That if you could produce something that says, right, host info, right? What's the current path? What's the current things? In fact, I'm gonna just Control S will stop scrolling. It's quite useful in terminals if things are going to scroll. So it's still happening. Just when I press Control Q, which will cancel the pause, it'll jump down to the bottom. Also, if you ever find that you get stuck, just try pressing Control Q, because sometimes people do Control S by accident. But look, it tells you what user we're in. It tells you what the user ID is. Okay, to put the password in, we know that. It tells you where the home is. It tells you what the path is for that person, which is really useful. The UMask is the thing about what the default permissions are on the files that you make. It's got the current host name. It's got the Linux version. It's got the distribution. It's got the architecture. Okay, Joe, what, I'm gonna
just a quick question.
Right, go on.
Would you consider that as one enumeration, or would you consider that a series of several enumerations?
I would say would be a single enumeration. Right? It's just basic information that you're putting together.
Just to clarify.
Yeah, I think I expect to have lots of that kind of question. Like, I've done this, does it count? If it's really, really short and simple, I would like to see something a little bit more. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but like, the sort of the elegance and those kinds of marks are not really going to be up there, because you're just going to have like one-liners. You can still show you've done the group work, you still show you've written your documentation. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fail or anything awful. It just means you're not really showing off what you could have done. So I'm going to kill that for a second now, because that will take a little while to go through all of them. And it's really useful information. This is actually a really nice thing. And if you're going for I forget what it's intermediate or advanced now, the one where you can run it from the command line and say, just do all the enumerations for this operating system. This is the kind of thing you might want to think about, like this kind of output. Each of these is a plugin. Yeah. Each of these things it can do is going to be a plugin, and then whether you do them or not is going to be based on whether it's the right operating system and so on and so on. So right, let's take this as our first bit of info. Right, let's take that as the things that we want to do. So currently I've got a thing called JS plugins, and I'm going to carry on writing in here. So in here I'm putting my stuff, and then over in the main program, you can see I'm just importing from JS plugins, import dumb SU de-escalation. So what I want to be able to do now is to say something like, from JS plugins, I could do it on one line, but I'm not going to. It's clearer this way. Import host info, right? That's what I'm going to call my class. And down here, by the enumerations, I'm going to add to that enumerations, append host info. There we go. Right. Let's create that. I'm going to do it down at the bottom so we're not going to confuse ourselves with anything else. So this is just in that file, and I'm going to say class host info, and I want to extend. I'm going to switch this one over to the general plugin stuff. I'm going to extend enumeration, right? Because that's the class that this is a type of. It's a more specialized version of. Now, when it initializes, does it need to do anything? I don't think it does at the moment, so I'm not going to worry about that. But the thing I do need it to do is to override these things. So even if we're not doing anything specific, I do want to set this bit of data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my initializer, my constructor is going to first of all call the parent constructor, so the superclass constructor. So that's going to be an enumeration. Initialize this. That means that anything that goes on in the initializer in here, and therefore if this extends the one from here and passes on, it's also going to pass on and initialize anything from here. Again, at the moment it's not really mattering, but later I might add stuff to this superclass. Your group might decide, no, when you initialize you also do these things, and we want all of them to do it. Or if you only want enumeration to do it, you would add the initializer in here and do it. So it depends on what you want to do.
James, I have a question, sorry.
Go ahead.
Now you're doing another class because it's a group project, basically. If it wasn't a group project, could they just edit the enumeration class?
You could, but then you'd have to write a new one every time. So the reason I'm doing this is because actually a lot of what these things do, like generating their info or those sorts of things, they are common. So you save yourself time.
Okay.
As an example, so the thing I've been working on recently. So this is quite a long set of things. But here I've got a transient class, okay, and that contains stuff about time to live. This is not to do with this project. It can tell whether the thing itself is dead, and it can produce a dictionary of itself that's suitable for turning into JSON. And I also have a generic sprite class which can generate its own unique ID, and it can have a place, and it can also calculate the distance to other things of its own type. It can also drop in and be used as if it was a tuple that has X and Y coordinates. So any other code or libraries that I use that expects a tuple to be passed in, this will also work because it will respond as if it's giving tuple data. And then later on, I can go, right, a message is a transient object. So I don't need to worry about how long that lives and whether it's dead or not at this point. I'll go for a splat, that's going to be hard to explain. A snowball, for example, is a type of sprite because it has position and it does stuff, and I can overwrite things if I need to, but I don't have to. Whereas the splat is a sprite and also transient, so it's something that has a fixed time to live, so it can extend from both of them. And now I'm using a lot of that code without having to rewrite it. And it's common with parts of snowball, it's common with parts of message, but all of those things in sprite and transient are being inherited. So rather than overwrite them, I'm actually just reusing that and making it so that if I improve on the design, maybe I make it more efficient, I make it more extensive, everything that inherits from it also gets that information. Okay, so you could easily add things in here about logging or different ways to run it. Has it been run at all yet? Does it have cached output? There's quite a few things that you can do that would help if you wanted to. So it's not just about group work. Sorry, that's a long answer, but it's a little bit more. There's a little bit more to it than just use classes if you're doing group work. It's not just about working with other people. It's also about using the most appropriate way to sort of design your software.
Okay. So in a more complicated case, that's better because it optimizes basically everything.
That's it. Yeah, and it gives you one place to change things. Like if I wanted to, for example, actually let's do this, and then I'll come back to something later. If you remind me, if I forget, I'll come back to something that will add functionality that's useful to all of them. Right. Right. So we're going to set the name. So I'm going to put a version on this, and actually this is one of the things I'm going to come back to later because I was just thinking about. So it's name, and then I'm going to give it an author. Bugs. Okay, so the only other thing I need to do is override execute. So how does this actually work? Well, it's going to run some basic commands and hopefully get some useful information out to the user. We're not going to log anything at the moment, so we don't need to worry too much about that, although that would also be quite nice if you could cache the values and stuff. For more advanced stuff, you might want to think about that. But for the basics, all the way up to the intermediate stuff, it's not a requirement. In fact, it's not a requirement at all. It's just things you can think about doing to improve stuff if you want to. Right, so how do we do this? Simplest way to do this stuff is to use inside the OS module, there is os.system. And this is explained in the documentation. So we can do things like find out what the host name is by executing hostname. Okay, let's just leave it at that for now and see if this works. Okay, so that's a really basic little thing, but let's see what we get. Okay, so first of all, we run this, and because we added that class to that list, sorry, the object to the list earlier, we now have it as E0. We should get a description, enumeration, host info version 1.0 by Joe Bloggs, provides basic information about the host, enter yes to in capitals to execute, and what do we get? 4061 CMV box. That's the host name. It wasn't particularly pretty. Okay, so how would we do something a little bit better than that? Well, what we just do is you would do print, put some blank lines in. You could then go, if we do this, the os.system will come onto the end. We'll find out now. And I'll put a blank line underneath as well. So let's try it out. Did I do that in the wrong order? Ah, okay, no, it's cache the thing. Okay, so we'll do it like this. We'll come back to that in a second. I'll show you a different way to capture input that might be more useful. So there we go. We just get host name for a 61CMV box. Okay, so it's very simple to put those things together. Let's now extend it. So we've got the host name. What else was interesting from here? We had current user. Right? How do we find the current user? Does anyone know?
Isn't it who am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Okay. So let's run who am I. So we'll do print what else do we want? What was good on here? So we've got we've got more stuff. So there's the other way you could do this. You can do ID, which will actually give you a bunch of information about the things that you're in. So you can see here that the user ID is this, and yeah, you've got all this kind of information. So that's kind of useful. You can see which groups the things are in and the names of those groups. So we could do that. We could do just do that for now. Okay, and now you can see we started to build up some useful information. Right, so we'll leave that bit there for now because that is how you do it, and you can kind of see how to build more useful things. Now, I said I'd give a quick example of the kind of things you might do to extend these classes, and I've just decided, do you know what, I want to have version numbering. Right, that's something that I really want in this because later on I want to be able to capture the output. I want to know which version was it that actually ran, right? And not all the plugins are going to change versions. So it's not just the version of the overall script. When I want to keep these logs, I want to see, well, which version of the host info is that? Because actually we fixed some problems between version 1 and version 2. So I want to know whether that's likely to be a cause. So I'm going to do self.version equals 1.0, right? There's a really standard thing for everything to start. Or do I want to have it as something that we can select? Well, when we make instances of this, it's not user data or programmer that's using this class that decides what version this is, and so it's staying inside there. And then when we output the information, we're going to put in, we've got names as the, and I want to put in version info, and then over here, if it's not version 1. So and there you go, host info version 1.2 pre-release by Joe Blogs, and you can see how easy it is then to add things, and that will be added to all the things that use it. Okay, dumb illustration, not that useful, version 1.0. Yes, they all have that information, and that makes it useful even when you're not doing group work, because you have common functionality amongst the parts. Okay, so that's how I would start doing this, and you can see if you use this branch and you want to start from this as a common point, you absolutely can do, and you can start writing these classes straight away. So in your groups, you can decide, yes, we're going to stick to this, and we're going to build up that way. You might find as you go along that you want to add things to it. Like you might want to say, well, I don't want to do it as this user. I want to find out about other users. So can I ask the user some stuff? And that means you're going to start changing what your expectation is for how the classes work, right? So let's just say, for example, actually, here's the place I meant to be. in host info, you could say, actually, do you know what? For all of these things, I also need like extra info. So we would give people, whatever that extra info is, and we'd say, right, you need to enter this data. If that's a requirement, you decide as a group that that's what will happen, and then it will work with everyone's menu system. So as they make modifications, you're all sticking to the same fundamental. Same fundamental sort of design guidelines that you're coming up with, and this should be documented. You should always make sure that you've got this in that README. In the guidance, it tells you to decide on what you're doing, and always make sure you've got it documented. But for now, you can absolutely start writing things and get a lot of the work done just by writing your own classes. Okay, so for the most basic form of this coursework, which can get you, decent marks, it is writing 3 such things. Okay, probably a little bit more polished than this, but that's kind of it. You also need your testing, documentation, and the whole lot of it else. But we know those. That's the stuff we always have.
Does it have to work outside of Linux? I mean,
No.
even on Windows and Mac OS?
It might well work on Mac actually, because there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, there's similar comments, but okay, so only Linux. We are targeting.
Linux.
Well, isn't Mac OS based on Linux anyway? So a lot of the basic commands would probably work anyway.
Yeah,
They have commonality, but I think isn't it based on BSD? If I remember rightly.
I'm pretty sure it's BSD. It's more Unix even Linux. I know that much.
Yeah, it is.
So
It's BSD Unix. So they've got very similar history, and there's going to be a lot of the commands will be the same. They're probably even the same source code in many cases, but BSD is actually slightly different.
Okay. I don't know if it's already been asked, but is the hardware like enumeration valid as a?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
things about your the network cards and stuff like that. So obviously you've got things like ifconfig, which is useful. So you can get some useful information from there. It's also IWconfig, which will tell you about the wireless adapters. Now, on this machine, there aren't really going to be any wireless adapters because it's a virtual machine. But you can get information out of there. So it's IW list. Is that what we did? We did IWconfig. IW list will allow you to do things like find like this frequencies, channels, bit rates. You can get a bunch of information there. Obviously, if you work inside the VM, that's going to be really tricky. So I'd say don't bother with that one there. But if you're doing this on your Linux box and you've got Wi-Fi, then have a go. It's quite interesting.
Do we have a target, or we need to target our machine to?
You're going to target your own machine. So one of the things I was going to suggest as well, as you go through, when you come to the privilege escalation, you might actually want to provide some so. I thought about making a target, but if I make a target, it means everyone's going to end up with the same privilege escalation, which is not the point. The idea is to get as many different variations as possible. Okay. But what I would do, I would look at something like GTFO bins, and this is a bunch of stuff that you can use to do things. So it says here, it's a curated list of Unix binaries that can be exploited by an attacker to bypass local security. Okay. The project collects legitimate functions of Unix binaries that can be abused to break out of restricted shells, or GTFO, right? Escalate or maintain elevated privileges, transfer files, blah, 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 right? So one of the things you can do is you look through here and go, well, which ones of these, allow me to do stuff, right? So run commands or read files and things like that. So look, base64 will allow me to do file reads, right? So base64, I can use that to read the file. Okay, that's not really that impressive. But if base64 is a command that either has the SUID bit set or can be run with sudo without a password, it means I can use that to read things that belong to root. Okay, so if we want demos, maybe on Monday we'll do more on the Privesc stuff and give some demos of how you can implement these things. Just remember that when you're doing this is where you really should be working inside the VM, because you don't really want to have this kind of stuff modified on an external system. This is this VM is made to be the thing that you don't really keep for later work or trust for anything. It is not going to be a safe place. For a start, you all have the same user, you all have the same password. Yeah, you're probably not going to keep it up to date and blah blah blah. So it's sort of your work area. It represents like the lab machines at the university where we know things sometimes need to be hosed down and we start again. So yeah, but we'll talk about that on Monday. What I wanted to do though, I did want to just very quickly show you a better way to grab the stuff. And actually, there's a few ways. So I'm going to I'm trying to work out now whether the best way to do this is with Spawn or popen Python 3.
I'd be inclined to go for sub-process check output.
Yeah.
Yeah, popen's okay as well, but check output will give you whatever a command spits out.
So that's the simplest, I think, then. Actually.
Yeah, because you don't then need to worry about connecting pipes or anything. It's probably the simplest. I think, unless of course
unless you need to provide
they've changed it in Python 3.8 or something mad like that. But I'm sure check output was the nicest one that I've used.
So we'll have a look. So you've got things like we've used here, os.system, and I mentioned os.spawn, subprocessor module that does a lot of these kinds of things. So you can see here, subprocess run, and it does whatever's in there. So it does the same kind of thing. And then here, subprocess run, you've got capture output equals to true, and it will actually hopefully give you stuff that's there. So well, let's see what. Let's just try it. We can test it out. This is always the easiest thing to do. Python's great for this. It's just being able to say import subprocess. I wish it would tab complete on the imports. It doesn't do that. And then so subprocess.run. And in fact, we'll do the. Actually, I think you can just give it straight. Yeah. So subprocess.run ls. And it runs. Okay, so you can see it runs just like it did with the os.system, except now we get something that comes back, right? So what's SP? SP is completed process. Okay, so it tells you about what's happened. We can tell it, if you look here with this option, that we also want that subprocess object to capture the output. So run, but this time we also want capture output. Okay. Well, that's fun.
Python version, then, isn't it?
I thought I'm in the 3. Well, I might. Hold on. Let me see which version of Python. I'm in 3.6. Hold on. Let me activate this VM because I think it's 3.8 inside. Activate.
3.9 is now available, just so people know.
I'm still on 3.6. Oh.
I think you can get like a beta test version of 3.10 at the moment as well, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, let's definitely not go there.
That's a lot nicer than the old version, because this is the pain that we had before, this whole connecting things to the pipes. And
it's still not too bad in here though. It's still not. Look, it's just a different. It's not difficult. It's not as bad as using popen though.
No, it's not. It's not. But
if you go back to the page, it said that it was added in 3.5, just below the image, the code, and changed in version 3.6.
Yes. But there's new in 3.5, but then 3.8 and onwards has a different version again. So here, so for the basics, obviously it runs in the same way. So we can do subprocess run, and that's not a problem. But instead of doing capture output equals true, instead what we have to do is std out equals subprocess.pipe. Okay, so that's a lot less helpful when you read it. It does make sense if you're used to popen and the old ways of doing things. That makes a lot of sense. But it does mean now that our SP object does have a string which contains all the information, and if I print it, decode. Then we get this. So this is that classic thing of byte strings, which is Dan's favourite, and strings being slightly different. So all we do is we print this out with a decode. So let's quickly put that into the code that we were using before. So I'm literally just going to steal that line because it's the easiest way for me to do it. So instead of this, I'm going to start running them. But do you know what? I'm already feeling like I'm going to have to write a lot of that code in the same way over and over again. So I'm going to make a grab output function. And I'm going to say it just takes a command. And what it's going to do is it's going to execute that command and just return the text. Okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to run whatever the command is that's been given, and I'm going to return sp.stdout.decode. Right, so I can just return it as a string, and it just means that now I can use grab output, and it puts all of these little bits which are fiddly all in the same place. So now I can do print hostname plus grab output hostname. Okay. Just test it with that one just to make sure everything works. Okay, so we should have, there we go, host name, and now we've got these things on one line, so we can do something with it. The reason I wanted to do this was not really just for that, it's because this is useful information, but I don't want it displayed like that. Okay, so I want it displayed so that each thing comes onto a new line. Okay, so let's have a look at this. I'm going to say ID data equals grab output ID, and then I'm going to say part equals ID data dot split on space, and then I'll, instead of doing, say for part in parts, print tab followed by whatever that part is. We'll start with that. Again, E0, yes, and now I've got a much nicer display. The groups one still has all of this stuff on there. Okay, so let's think about how we divide that up. It's always going to be the third one in, probably. Maybe you should check, but I'm going to actually just assume that it is for now. So I'm going to say for part in part up to, but not including the second one. So let's just check that works. So it's not going to display the groups. Yeah, that's good. So that's ID info. And then I'm going to say group info. And I'm going to say groups is equal to parts 2 split on no, I'm going to take the first part off first. Yeah, then I want to take off the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the first seven things. So parts 2 from 7 onwards, split on this, and then for G in groups, print tab G. So enumerate, yes, and it helps that's an F string rather than just a string, so it did exactly what I told it, which is unfortunately what Python always does. And then look at our stuff now. ID info, group info. Yeah, that's actually quite useful. I would probably, if I was really doing this, you know, and not running through this in a quick demo, I would spend a little bit more time and just tidy these things up put a bit more checking in to make sure that we actually do have the third one being group, you know, in case there's anything else, a modified version of ID or whatever. I would find the one that has group in and I would split that rather than just the third one. And I would probably also divide this up. I would, like, you know, split on this character in each of these, assuming it's there, and I'd put the name first and then perhaps the you know, or some spacing, because to me that's not particularly easy to read. So maybe I put some padding in. You know, the group IDs are going to be, you know, a number of digits. So I'd probably split it, you know, use the F strings formatting so I can have them almost like a table. You know, so there's lots of things you can do. And it starts to become, you know, it already starts to become a useful tool for showing you useful information and giving you a way to do multiple things. So, yeah, basic host info. Other things I might do would be, you know, what are the currently running processes? So, yeah, you can get that with like PS capital A, for example. So it shows you a bunch of stuff like this, or the classic PS orcs, which a lot of people use, shows you a bunch of information. Again, this kind of stuff's useful because, you know, you can find out what people are running and what they're doing. And as an example of that, let's just say, so I've got a few minutes left. Let's say we've got a another user running. So I called my target user Alice McTarget person. su Alice. So now I'm Alice. And Alice is going to run nano because she's doing some work and she's doing things. And if we look along here, I can actually see that Alice is doing these things. So what can I tell? I can tell that Alice is a bash user and she's using nano at the moment, right? Really handy stuff. What about if I also, if nano, doing stuff here. Let's have a look at, so she's running nano here, that's 19038, ls proc 19038. We've got what permissions we've got for that. So we can see, we could go and find out what the current working directory is. We can look at, what else can we read? We can read the command line, right? So this. Okay. See that? I can actually tell what she's been doing, which is one of the reasons you should never do things like just close that. Let's think of a good example. I know. That as Alice have to do it as me, but let's just do this as me. So too many errors. So I'm running something as root using su_do, and because I may be trying to be clever or I'm writing a script, I've actually put the password on the command line. And what that means now is if I do ps_orcs, I can probably look and find. Yeah, so we can see there's the su_do, we can see what we're doing, and we could probably somewhere find the command line, but actually the echo probably isn't going to work because it's going to be transient. But anything that takes a potential password on the command line is going to show up and be visible. I just realised echo is not going to actually survive long enough. What else can I do? What else can I do? I forgot MySQL. No. So there are a few commands. The password potentially on the command line. I think you can do it. Lots of things turn it off. Please put, yeah, maybe not. But you'll find there are things that will have passwords on the command line. So yeah, being able to enumerate in there is quite useful. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. How are we doing with chat and questions in there? Anything
Yeah, most of it's just sort of around repo organization and stuff. I think what people are worried that with the group work, they're not going to do enough, or they're not going to get the right marks, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what I've said to them is that, you know, you don't have to initialize an empty Git repo. Do you know what I mean? Like, come up with the stuff between your group, have sections, and have like the front end made as a group, and then you can go away and, you know, create branches for each of you guys separately off of the master branch.
Yeah.
And add all of your stuff there, basically, and then that's how we can see what you're doing and how you track all of these things, and that's how it's done in production as well. You would create a branch, and that would be your new functionality, and then it would get tested and then eventually merged somewhere down the line. Basically, we're just asking you to do everything up to the merge part.
Yeah, and you can even do it with forks if you want to. You can do that. So that's also possible. I don't expect you all to get it perfect, right? And one of the reasons is you won't ever get it perfect until you're out there and working in an environment where it actually has to happen for production reasons, right? Because there are just so many things that can change. What I am going to ask, though, and I'll put up some more guidance as we get close to the deadline about how to represent this in your submission, is I'll ask you to describe what your process was and give some screenshots of your check-ins so that you can show that you've done iterative development. You haven't just done it all at the end, and also that you know, you have thought about how this stuff works. So don't feel like you're going to be sort of marked heavily on these things. They are more forgiving than you might realise.
Yeah, I think that's the best takeaway, actually, is that it is more forgiving than you realise. You know, we don't expect you guys to be pros right now. Your first year's barely got your foot in the front door. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. All of this assessment, it's not the final assessment of where you're going to be at the end of the course. It's the assessment that you're taking the right steps as a first year to be getting to the second year. Yeah, that's what first year assessments are for, almost universally. I mean, there are one or two things where we probably won't go over it again, where you literally are being assessed for the first and only time. And that's going to be stuff like, you know, do you know what Git is and that kind of stuff, the basics. And probably more so in things like the professionalism module, you're not going to keep repeating that. You're going to have different aspects of professionalism that come up.
Do we need to include how many panic attacks we've had when trying to decide to work out what to do?
As long as my code is neat and works, that's mostly what I care about.
Yeah, and that's mostly what we care as well. So as long as it's neat and works and does the stuff, that's your basic requirements. Then have you tested it? Have you written some documentation? Did you use Git reasonably sensibly? It's easy to demonstrate these things. Is it documented? Those sorts of things. They're all important. But again, we're not expecting to judge you as if we were judging candidates for a programming position in a big group. On the panic attacks, I think the thing to do is plot them over time, because you're not going to get any extra marks, but you know what? It'd be useful to know if they're related to the different ways we present the information.
That's
That
true,
would be kind of handy. So
that data would be good.
like it would be nice to know if they've gone down a little bit because we've done the extra session. That would be handy.
Should we track all-nighters as well?
You shouldn't have to do it. Okay. Now I'm saying this as someone that tends to wait until the night before and then pull an all-nighter, because I seem to do my best work like that. That is not my recommendation for how you should be doing things.
There was one other thing as well that I came down on about, sort of thing, like I had an opinion on, that you might want to add your 2 cents worth to as well. People doing the same functionality, so doing the same, I guess, enumeration method on the same team. I
would suggest not to do that.
Yeah.
The point of having the team is to get the variety, and there's plenty out there.
Yeah, that's what I said. Basically, like, if you did do it, then you're going to sort of lose marks in the teamwork department at the very least.
I'll put up some notes on this as well. I was sort of think about the best way to help you split the work. But my gut feeling is that for everyone can do one that's like the one I just showed you, but do something different. Like, you can all do something that calls out to some system commands and collects the data up, a little bit of processing. But then you can all do something that's a bit more advanced, like going and looking through the file system, loads of directories and running through them to see which ones are accessible. That take a little bit more effort to do. Well, I mean, at Christmas, that would be appropriate, but unfortunately, the coursework will be in by then now. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah. So not very fun.
Yeah,
Jennifer,
I have a question
referencing-
about.
Sorry,
Oh,
Matthew,
sorry.
I'll just answer this
Yeah,
one quickly.
go
And
ahead.
you. Yes, referencing, if you refer to books and things, put them in the references. You don't necessarily have to do a lot of that to get this one up and running, because I'm looking at the actual code more than anything else and how you've gone about it. But if you actually say, right, this is how this works, and it's based on this writing, or how this thing works, yeah, absolutely, put the stuff in there. Sorry, Matthew, go on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask basically if I do a very large enumeration script as one method, and I realize that, that could be my 2 methods like in one. Can I just send you an email or a message to ask, my enumeration method does this, this, and this? Is it accountable for 2 methods or just one? If I don't know, basically, because previously you said that one enumeration is like even the user information is enough. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah. So if you add them all in one thing, are you making it more difficult on yourself? So I would like to see more things. So like if you've got basically the same code but you change the command, then I'm not going to really want to see that. So I will put up some guidance, because technically that would count as two separate things. But if you've got 2 lots of code that's identical except for about 5 characters, I don't think it's unreasonable for me to say that doesn't count.
Can I basically merge my 2 methods in one single command? For example, in the menu, I have my one enumeration selection, but it has basically the amount of work of 2 methods.
I would treat it like headers, to be honest with you, and that would be like, if you split it up, it's easy for us to mark and easy for us to see, right?
Okay.
The clearer that you make things, the easier it is for everything to go your way. Okay, so
yeah. Yeah, because I tend to overdo things. So okay, it does this thing, but it's not as complete as I want it to be. So let me add this other thing, and I do the amount of 3 or 4 enumeration methods instead of 2. That's basically my concern.
What I would say is, if you've got something that's very large, if it's staged at all, like there are multiple stages you go through, maybe you want to think about having that as you could do a submenu. You could actually have you could think about, is part of it scanning to see if it's possible, and the other part executing it. Have them as 2 separate things. So it is better to break them up for sure.
If you do get in that position, though, you can totally talk to us about it. Like, we might be able to poke you in the right direction. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Jennifer, parts of the exfiltration are examples. So don't use stuff that I've explicitly shown you. So like that host enumeration, if you want to use that, use it, but just extend it so that it does your stuff, and say these 3 pieces, where James is, I've done these 3 that go on the end. That's fine, but obviously you need to show the stuff that you've written. And I'm not sure which bits of the exfiltrator you'd want to take out. If you're using it in terms of concept, then absolutely go ahead and do your own version of things. If you're literally using my code, then you can, but you have to say that that's what's happening, cite it, and then just be prepared to not get marks for that bit. It won't be wrong, but it won't count as your contribution. So as long as it's let's say, how to explain it better, if you take a piece of my code, a recognizable chunk of code, not like the start of a for loop, no one's going to care about the start of a for loop, and you use it, that's okay if you tell us where it came from. And also you need to be thinking, but I'm not going to be marked on that bit, so I need to make sure that it's only used to enable or to enhance the code that I actually want to be marked on. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Nav, websites, if you use them, then absolutely refer to it. Put it in your bibliography. You can just say this is an enumeration method that I saw on here, and I'm going to automate the use of that. You don't have to come up with new methods for this stuff, right? There's always new ways to do things. This is one of the best things about cybersecurity, but you don't have to find 0 days as a first year, okay, or as a third year. Yeah, that's not how it works. You know, people in industry, you know, get excited if they discover a 0 day. You know, it's fanfare and, you know, big news. So you're not expected to be doing that all of the time.
Well, that's ruined my coursework idea for the second year, James.
Well, I mean, let's see how you write it up. I think it would definitely be good if you got a 0 day for level 1 coursework. Automatic pass, maybe not. You still got to show all the other factors. But honestly, if you
could be a lot of money under 0 day.
I was going to say, yeah, just think about whether you want to publish it in the coursework or whether you want to find some other route. I'm not suggesting you go to any of the creepy performers and try and sell it there, but you know, good 0 days can go for, you know, $250,000 on the black market.
It was I think it was MWR. I can't remember, but they had a beer fridge that was wired up to the Internet of Things, and it was normally locked. But if they got a CVE published, it would like play a fanfare throughout the office, and the beer fridge would open, which was really quite cool, you know.
There were a couple of 0 days for Zoom earlier this year that were on the dark web for 300,000 each.
Yeah, see, this is quite serious stuff. So, Jennifer, I would say if you do find one, you know, and this goes to everyone, yeah, talk to us. But it's a bit of a hot potato, so just be aware for a few reasons. I mean, obviously, you know, you're holding on to something that is going to crack things open that no one can stop, because that's the point of the 0 day, and people will want that. But also, the industry has a bad habit of occasionally prosecuting people for discovering things if you don't handle it well. So, you know, just be careful.
Responsible disclosure.
Responsible disclosure is definitely one of the things that needs to happen, but also not just the way you go about it to be a sensible person, but the way you go about it to protect yourself, not just everyone else. So, you know, don't do what Skylarov did and end up being, you know, nabbed by the Russians. Don't do what a few other British people have done and get extraordinarily renditioned over to the States. You know, and, you know, consider your visits to Russia soon after. You know, just be aware that people will be interested. Claim not to have used union resources. That's, I mean, that's another issue, right? I'm going to stop recording.